evening, everybody, and welcome to our June Free Press Book Club meeting for Fishing with Tardelli. Thank you all so much for joining us. Just do a quick round of introductions. Tonight from the Free Press, we have columnist Niigaan Sinclair joining us as host. We have Chris Hall from McNally Robinson, and of course, we have Neil Besner, our author this month. Thank you so much for joining us, Neil.
Thank you.
Before we continue, I just want to note that Niigaan, Chris, and I are joining you from Winnipeg, which is Treaty 1 territory, the traditional land of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dene, and Dakota people, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. And Neil is joining us from Lake of the Woods, which I believe is Treaty 3 territory. Is that right, Niigaan? Yes? Okay, got that. So tonight's meeting will go as it always does. I'm going to throw to Chris in just a moment to do an introduction. Then Neil will do a reading, and then we'll do a Q&A. If you have any questions, you can throw them in the live chat box to the right of your video, and we will try to get to as many as we can. And then there's a few housekeeping but things to talk about at the end of the meeting, because this is my last book club meeting before I go on maternity leave. So a few things to talk about before I go. And with that, I will throw to Chris to do his introduction.
Thank you. Thanks, Erin, and hello, everyone. Tonight, we are going to discuss Neil Besner's memoir, Fishing with Tardelli. It's a memoir of family and time lost. It's a book about the gaps in memory as much as it is about memories. And it's a book about remembering as much as memory. Neil says he remembers everything obsessively. But how do you assemble the memories, give them a narrative? Memories branching endlessly, but no tree, he writes. To give these flashes of memory some structure, Neil turns to a different tree, a family tree. He builds his story around three fathers, a father figure in Tardelli, a stepfather in Senor Walter, and a biological father in Mort the Sport. But memories remain difficult to stabilize. Things happen, and then they happen again in memory, over and over, the motion and progress and regress like the waves crashing on the beach. How do you capture them in words? I find it hard to summarize the book. It made me think about my own memories and how fleeting and elusive they are. It feels like, at least theoretically, one could retrace a lifetime of steps. But how would you ever begin to retrace a lifetime of thoughts or feelings? Putting our stories into words seems possible, but then again, complicated and unsatisfying. What happened is always so much bigger and sometimes better. In ways it is hard to put into words, the book felt right. But before I get lost in my own memories, I'll get the evening started by asking Neil Besner to read from Fishing with Tardelli.
Chris, thank you very much for that generous introduction. And thank you to the Free Press for inviting me. Thank you to Niigaan. Niigaan, so good to see you again. So I'm grateful for the opportunity. So I'm going to do a brief reading from the fourth section of the book, and it is about my biological father in Montreal. So here goes. Montreal, August 1962. I'm 12. It's the summer before 4 years of Jewish boarding school in Connecticut. I had just begun to fish with Tardelli in Brazil. A month earlier, I had gone out with him, Papa Raka, Marili, and Walter Gouveia for the first time and caught my first 3 bluefish. I remember the feeling of the first fish on my line. I was using a silver zigzag, zigue-zague in Portuguese, learning how to fish with a hand line, puxa-puxa or pull. That first bluefish sends the sudden tight tension of its shaking weight coursing up the line into my hands, and I am there for life. "Ta la, it's there," I heard Tardelli mutter at his line. I was watching the men leaning over the water, all on one side of the boat. They were barefoot. "Ta la, they are there. I am there, or I am here. I am staying in Montreal with my grandparents at 4332 Westmount Avenue. I am 12. I'm standing in the sunshine in the back driveway off Argyle. A white Buick Skylark convertible, its top down, blue interior, pulls in. At the wheel, I think, is my father. I'm not certain. It's been a few years since I've seen him. My father steps out of the car and I see that his eyes are blue. I'm surprised. I thought that they were brown, I tell him. My father in Montreal had other nicknames, most fondly as we boys grew up into our later teens and early 20s, Mort the Sport. Mort the Sport was a pathological gambler, addicted to betting on professional and college football, on Major League Baseball, his favorite, and hockey. He was addicted to card games, gin, blackjack, pinochle, and at the casinos in Vegas and later in Atlantic City, baccarat. He liked to drop in unannounced to the back rooms of the pawn shops on Saint Antoine Street East in Montreal to play a few hands of gin with the owner. Weekdays, late afternoon, he liked to stop in at the Linton Club on Guy Street to play pinochle for an hour or two on his way home. When I was at USC in LA, he would call me in the fall before the weekend's games. Who do you like, boy, USC or UCLA? Or how are you fixed for blades? Sometimes I didn't understand the language. When I bought a VW Beetle in the summer of 1970 in Montreal, on its maiden voyage, he asked me to give him a lift downtown. Lowering himself into the front seat, he asked me, "How's the pickup in this, boy?" I explained that it was a four-cylinder. It wasn't very quick. No, boy, I'm asking, how's the pickup in this thing? Eyeing me sidelong. He smoked endlessly, Du Mauriers, punctuated with cigars, Coronas. He ambled, he was deliberate. He compiled elaborate statistics on starting pitchers, odds, ERAs. All of these figures entered neatly and methodically on the pads of the large lined sheets more properly used for their designated purpose to record license plates, show daily balances on the lots that comprised his parking business. He entered the figures with a thin gold-plated ballpoint pen that my sister Marilyn and I bought him for his birthday one year. He lunched regularly with his bookie, Harry Goodman, an affable man, at the Brioche Room in the Mount Royal Hotel. He liked his nickname. He liked it when we asked him, "Morton, how's the sportin'?" Early one summer evening in 1970, the cops pulled up to the house on Clark, and two young guys got out, came politely to the door, and asked my father to come downtown with them. "Fellas, why don't I just follow you in my car?" he suggested, but they demurred. He sent me up to his bedroom to retrieve his sports jacket, but I missed his signal and failed to remove the little book from the inside pocket. The officers exulted. My father's two little boys from his second marriage glowered at them. His wife was annoyed with me. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Right. I think this is my portion right here. So bonjour, everybody. Bonjour, Niigaan Magaraduk, Niigaan Webadam Nitishna Kos, Namago Shindo Dem. It's nice to be here. My name is Niigaan Sinclair, and I am a columnist at the Winnipeg Free Press. I'm also a professor at the University of Manitoba in the Department of Indigenous Studies. And I fully blame Neil Besner for everything I've ever done in academia. So I just want that out there at the start, that I was a student way back in the day when Dr. Besner, as we all called him, was at the University of Winnipeg. And that's about the last respectful thing I'm going to say tonight. So I just wanted you to know that. Oh, look, he's even trying to escape already, trying to get someone to call him to take him away. But you know, it's such a great honor to do this work tonight, to host and discuss this book right here, which I've just been devouring over the weekend, spending time thinking about. And I think one thing that has become very evident through all of this text is that it's been a real journey, but also to see a part of your life that I never got to see, as you know, I've known you for about, I'd say 30 years now. And I never got to see this portion of your life, spending time in Brazil, growing up. And the four parts of the book that are worth talking about, and for those who haven't got the book yet, what you're going to see is the book is really split up into four parts, named each after a very seminal and important person in Neil's life. The four people are his mother, Judith, of course, also known as, correct my pronunciation if I'm wrong here, but Dona Judith.
Did you?
And then, of course, his father, Mortimer, also known as Mort the Sport. And then, of course, Walter, his stepfather, also known as Signor Walter. And then, of course, Tardelli. I'd also like to say that there is, while the book's in 4 parts, Gail makes a very significant appearance at the end. And I would actually say that the 4th part is kind of a 5th part added in there, especially because it's such a love story that kind of envelops you at the end. But I want to talk to you quickly about something that's a little bit literary. If we can jump into the literary world for just a minute here, or a sort of academic approach here, I think readers, upon reading this book, will notice immediately that it's a memoir, but it also poses as something else. And I want to read you a section that I think struck me as very much talking about what this book is. So if you were to label this book, the bookstore is going to call it a memoir, but I want you to perhaps it's a little bit different than that. This is what you say. This is in the section, of course, for Signor Walter. Names, first words, and happenstance. Maybe that's why I do not accept distinctions between stories and so-called real life, between memoir and story. Why I have conducted a lifelong affair with words and a more complicated affair with memory and time, so that the past has always shimmered too close to once upon a time. If you were to say, I think we both know that nonfiction and fiction are kind of arbitrary categories. What would you label this book? And then secondly is, what's the difference between the so-called truth and then the way that we imagine the truth?
Well, Niigaan, first of all, it's a pleasure to talk to you as always, but this is the first time that we have talked about books in a long time. So thank you for the question. Yes, you're right. The book is in part, it's a question. It's a question about exactly that, the boundaries or the boundary lines, the frontiers between fiction and nonfiction, between memoir and biography and autobiography, between poetry and prose and music, in fact. And what I'm trying to insist again and again is that just as there is no clear demarcation between past and present, as I try to make clear in the book, I don't believe that there is a clear demarcation between memory and imagination, between what you make up and what you really remember, because that's the nature of memory and that's the nature of language. And what I'm trying to say in as plain a language as I can is that there is not one truth, there is not one way of seeing things, there are multiple ways, and that life is complicated and memory is complicated too. And one other thing, Niigaan, I tried as hard as I could to make it simple, to keep it simple. And I hope that I did that.
Okay, well, we have a listener question, or sorry, a reader question that I want to pose to you because they perhaps didn't quite get the simplicity until they got to the family tree at the end. So for those of you that haven't seen the book yet, the book ends with a family tree that's kind of like this. And by the end of the book, it's only, I can't even remember how many pages it is, 150 pages or so. And but it is a absolute ride through about 20 years, but much bigger than that, but focuses really on 20, 25 years or so of growing up in Brazil, growing up in Montreal, a few different references to Winnipeg, looking back on your time in those two places, a little bit of a pit stop in Toronto, but for the most part, it begins with Tardelli and ends with a beautiful marriage, a beautiful reunion. Oh, I gave away the ending there a little bit, but I think anybody would know that, it's this really remarkable story that talks about the journeys that we take. And I was really struck at the end of the book that's kind of how I felt by going through the different journeys. And if you think too about the journey that your parents have gone through in Montreal, literally sort of switching spouses, what a fascinating sort of complicatedness it is. And trying to make a simplicity in that, I think, challenged one of our readers. One of our readers said, why didn't you put the family tree, which would have helped them to map it, at the front and not at the back? And I think that's an interesting question.
So let me tell you, of course I thought about putting it at the front. So if you think about a novel like 100 Years of Solitude, you'll remember Gabriel Garcia Marquez's big novel, that the family tree is at the front. Or the Stone Diaries, Carol Shields' book, the family tree is at the front, and typically a family tree will come at the front. The reason I put it at the back, Niigaan, was because I wanted not to distract. I didn't want people leafing back to the beginning and say, well, who the hell is that? And how does that? I wanted the words to explain things without a graph. But I knew that it's complicated, that names get repeated, that there are all kinds of coincidences and refractions and reflections. And so I knew there had to be a family tree, but I put it at the end for clarity and to make, my hope was that by the time you got to the end, you wouldn't really need the family tree. It's just there for confirmation. But I thought that it would distract if it was at the beginning.
The book begins with this very unique and quite intimate relationship between yourself and Tardelli. And I have to admit that having seen, read, and spent much of my life kind of studying the long history of sort of male coming of age stories, upon seeing this very unique relationship with this Brazilian man who is on a boat with you, teaching you about how to fish, teaching you about women, teaching you about love, teaching you about water. So much of that first section then goes into what is a very complicated life, by any standards, I think. You would see that this is a very complicated life, that very complicated relationships between you and your father, between you and your stepfather, between you and your mother, and of course, kind of the ways in which you're trying to untangle all of that. But interestingly enough, it starts with fishing. And the name of the book is about fishing. So Tardelli kind of sets you up sort of as a template of, there's a really powerful scene talking about catching groupers. And to catch a grouper is kind of a step-by-step process of how it is that you catch and then take care of it and then, deliver it. What is the importance of fishing in relation to all these very complicated stories that almost come immediately following?
Another good question, Niigaan. The title of the book is, as you say, Fishing with Tardelli. And the reason that the title is that, and that is the first story, is because there are many ways in which I think that the relationship with Tardelli is the key relationship in the book. First of all, he's the only one who I'm not biologically or familially related to. And arguably, he is the person that I was closest to. And he was the only Brazilian. And so he taught, not only did he do all of the things that you just said he did, you're right, but he also taught me about Brazil. Of course, my whole relationship with him was in Portuguese. He knew I taught him a couple of English words: fish, seagull, seagull. But basically, our relationship was in Portuguese. And it wasn't just the language. I love the language, but it was the way in which Brazilian men live. He was a working class guy, and being working class in Brazil is not like being working class in North America. They are way poorer, materially speaking. They have different familial relations. They live very different lives. Tardelli never got on an airplane, for example, didn't believe in flight, didn't believe that it really existed. I only saw evidence that he could write once, when I discovered a postcard in his locker that he did not send. So he
I love that scene, by the way. Like, I love that scene where you find, and he's addressed it to you, but he didn't write it, right?
Well, he didn't know how to address it.
Which is so symbolic.
That's right. He North America for him. There was no Canada and the United States. There was North America, and he did not. I have to say, he didn't really believe in it. He knew that I went away for 8 months of the year or 9 months of the year for some time, but it was beyond his comprehension. And yet, I would say that he was an extremely intelligent guy in all the important ways. He was a loving guy who knew a lot about life and taught me many, many things, which I treasure to this day, including fishing.
One of our readers asks, did you pick the title? Was there any sort of, it is kind of an odd title. I went in shopping on the weekend to go and get the copy of the book. And, I even felt weird saying Tardelli to the person who was helping me find the book. Did the editors or did the ECW press suggest any other titles? Or
no, they didn't. In fact, Fishing with Tardelli was the title of a short piece that I wrote for Prairie Fire. I published first in Prairie Fire, and then expanded and developed when I wrote it as part of the book. And no, Fishing with Tardelli was my title. The subtitle, the press said, "Don't you want to have a subtitle which tells people that it's?" They warned me. They said, if you just leave it as Fishing with Tardelli, it'll get listed with the sports section. So you'd better.
Well, the word memoir doesn't appear, and so I think that might be an issue.
Well, it does. The subtitle is.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. The subtitle. There is a subtitle.
Yeah, the subtitle is A Memoir of Family in Time Lost, and I stole part of the subtitle from Proust. In Search of Lost Time, because Proust was, I admit it, he was the biggest influence on me, and anybody who is interested in memory and writing about memory, you can start and finish with Proust, because he is the greatest writer that we have in any language in the 20th century to write about memory. So, mind you, his book is 3,000 plus pages long, and I wanted something much more compact, but I wanted, that I write about Proust in the book, and I wanted something compact, but I wanted people to think about Proust and what he does, which is to write vividly about memory, which is so important for him. So
I want to get to memory in just a second here, but I remember I was like, why did I miss that? And then I realized that it was because it's very difficult to actually see the subtitle in the front cover. Do you want to talk about the front cover? We have a reader question about the front cover.
Sure. The front cover it's actually a mock photographic rendition of the bay in Rio de Janeiro, and so what you see is you see it from above. The mountain on the right hand side is Sugarloaf. You're looking as if you were looking down from the Christ figure from Corcovado, which looms over the whole city, and you see two bodies of water. One is the inner bay and one is the outer bay. And because so much of the first section, and indeed so much of the book itself, takes place on water and in this bay, I thought it important to encourage people to think about the fact that the book is taking place in a place somewhere, the bay in Rio, and that's why that cover.
One of our readers sent in a question to say they think that the most important line in this book is, "I remember everything obsessively." That's on page 82. My favorite section relates to that, so I wanted to sort of tie the two together here. And it refers to what you spoke about just a minute ago in terms of memory. Most people, when they talk about memory, especially when they talk about autobiography or memoir, when people tell their own story, they're often talking about a transition time in their life. I was an X, now I'm a Y. And it's because of the equal sign, right? Or the plus sign or something, whatever's in between the X and the Y is the story. It's the transition. And so much about that, I think, has a lot to do with memory. As you said, the action of recalling is a part of your growth. So the section that I'm talking about is the section with Mort the Sport. So as you're talking about your father, it's on page 113 for any of you that are out there. It says, you say, perhaps that is why memory insists, and insists is in italics, to make up for lost time. Why lost time calls immediately to metaphor, why making up for lost time becomes so fraught, why words, phrases refuse to remain literal. The affair with words, it never ends. Is memory about an affair with words, trying to give words to something that is so fleeting? You know, if you think back to what you remember, especially so, you know, long ago, it's almost like words are what you have to sort of wade through. You almost have to go fishing for words to find the articulation of that thing that was so long ago.
So you're right. I am obsessive about memory. It's not something that I try to do. It just is the way I am. Whether I have a good memory or a bad memory, it's not that. It's just that I tend to remember a lot from my childhood and so the book takes me up to the age of 20, as you said. And if you think about how you remember, often your memory tells you a story, and tells you a story in images and in words. And so language becomes extremely important. And what I was trying to say in the passage that you read so beautifully, I have to say, is that words themselves are ambiguous. They are metaphorical. That's why I said the affair with words never ends. Affair, like many of the words in that passage, means at least twice. So words don't have fixed meanings, but you have to do the best that you can. You have to find a way to say what it is that you mean, and you have to be as precise and careful and taut, T-A-U-T, and coherent as you can with something as slippery as language. That's what I'm trying to get at.
I want to just keep going here. I mean, there's so much interesting stuff with the book, but I think that what's the most striking to the book, and I think it's because, you know, I don't want to admit it publicly, but I do care about you, and I think, you know, I think that the story that you end finding Gail after so many years of, I think it was 40 some years, right? 45 years of 1971, having this tumultuous affair, or this beautiful romance with Gail, and then you break up with her in 1972, which she, you know, sort of reminds you of regularly, and then you find her later on social media, way in 2016, I think. And so this kind of revisiting is very much about you choosing love, or taking the risk of love, and taking the trip of going back into your memory to find love. And so much about that is reminiscent of the story of Judith as well, and the way in which you're talking about your mother as your mother choosing love, quite controversially, to go and go on this adventure of a lifetime with someone in that really kind of blew up her life at the time. And you, having found someone much later in your life, repeat that pattern, not by blowing up your life, but by certainly leaving your 30, 40 years relationship with Winnipeg, heading to Toronto, and now ending up in Lake of the Woods, very far away from where you spent a great deal of time. How much of those stories, you can already tell that I've got a theory. I've got a theory that there's some if I were to write an essay, I would say the two stories of love in Neil Besner's Fishing with Tardelli. Do you see, was that your intention, or do you see some of that going on? Or
so first of all, I don't see it quite that way. I do understand what you're saying. It is a love story. My mother's story certainly was a love story. I think they're a little bit different, but I certainly get the connection that you're making. And just for the record, I have to say that Gail was totally willing to move to Winnipeg to be with me. And she had lived in Toronto for 35 years at that point. And I love Winnipeg. I mean, I don't have to tell you that. I lived there for 30 years, which is way longer than I've lived anywhere else. But I persuaded her that it was probably better for us and better for her that I moved to Toronto rather than she moving to Winnipeg. And the compromise was that we got this place on Lake of the Woods where we live for 4 months every year. And I come to Winnipeg 3, 4, or 5 times a year to see my kids, grandkids, and the many, many friends that I have in the writing community and elsewhere in Winnipeg. So I don't feel that I've lost Winnipeg. On the contrary, I have gained another city, if you like. I started to ramble, but I do see the connection. I do see the parallels. The only thing I would say is, yes, they are 2 love stories. No, I don't think they are as similar as you might think. Certainly, my mother sacrificed many, many things. She was, she was in a community in Montreal, and she left. She left in her 30s and lived in Brazil for 60 years or less than that. She died in 2003. So she was in Brazil for going on 50 years. And my stepfather was there for going on 70 years. So yes, they reshaped their lives and transformed their lives. I have to say, in 1950s Montreal, it was a much more revolutionary thing to do than it is in 2016. Very, very different times. But yes, I do appreciate the connection.
Well, I mean, I think part of it is that it's about referencing memory, and it's about trying to pull, I mean, so much of when we tell our own story, it's the complicated act of trying not to make it solely about our own perspective or making ourselves into the hero. Or, I mean, it's a complicated process. And I think one thing that I love, right in the smack dab middle of your love story, talking about reconnecting with Gail, you say sort of this moment of brutal reality, which is to remember everything is a fatal, if involuntary compulsion. Worse might be to remember in words. My own private pandemic. Oh, sorry, the part was just before that. Sorry. Sometimes it seems that memory wants to murder time and that writing wants to murder the imagination.
Yes.
That is, if I can make a t-shirt, I would make a t-shirt out of that.
Let me try to explain very, very quickly what I'm doing there. I have thought for 50 years about what is imagination and what is memory. And they are not, of course, separate faculties. They are merged. And the reason I love Proust so much is if you read him, you realize he made a lot of things up, and it's, you cannot tell what's real, what's historical, and what's invented. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. In this memoir, I tried as hard as I could to only say what was true, small t true, at the same time to insist that you're never going to know. You can't know. Language is slippery, and you might be misremembering. So the facts are the facts, but we all, as you say, we all make up our own stories about the past. So, yeah.
Is that where love enters? I mean,
well, I think it does. I don't think that you can love without remembering. I don't think that you can love another person without shaping a story about them, a small s story, not a grand narrative. I don't. But yes, yes.
That I'm going to be thinking about that for weeks. Is about to remember, or to almost, it's not that mistrust is not the question. It's to understand memory for what it is then to sort of jump into faith and love. And
yes. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to say one thing. You'll remember this from the book. I say that we all have amnesia. I believe that we are all amnesiacs, that we forget much more than we remember, that this is one of the ills of the contemporary world, that we just don't remember. And when you don't remember, you make mistakes. You live a quarter of a life, in my humble opinion.
Chris, sorry, did you want to hop in with a couple questions?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm fascinated by this. I said before we came on air that this book really had me thinking, and now there's this conversation going on that I'm going to be thinking about for weeks too. It's that's amazing. But we had a question from the. What's that?
It's Niigaan's fault.
Well, I'll credit him. There's a question from a reader, and it goes into what I was going to ask about, which is the acknowledgements at the back. You spend more time than I can recall anyone else talking about the publisher, not just an editor, but the whole operation at ECW. And a reader was asking, what is the publishing process like for you, and how involved is your copy editing team?
Okay, so first of all, I have to say the people at ECW are terrific, and that's why I listed them all there. But let me try to explain very quickly. What ECW does, and what a lot of presses now do, is they hired an editor not connected with the press, a writer. I'm not going to name her because it doesn't matter in a sense. She's brilliant. She's a novelist herself, and she read the manuscript, and then we went back and forth. She made suggestions. I said, no, this, yes, that, et cetera, et cetera. So there was that level of editing. The press, by the time I was through with her, the press did much more copy editing, as you say, than actual editing. But they were I am a neurotic proofreader because I've been an academic for 45 years, and I hate finding mistakes in the free press, for example. I can't stand finding mistakes. I have to tell you that I've read this book many times. I haven't found a mistake yet. Now, I found badly written passages, but that's on me. It's not on them. It's on me. There are things that I profoundly regret that I needed to spend more time with. But they were scrupulous in the ways in which they took care of and loved the text. They worked hard, and that's why I said what I said. I happen to know the publisher of ECW. I've known him for 40 odd years. ECW Press used to be an academic press. Now it's become a mid-range commercial press that does all kinds of things. But one of the things it does very well is this kind of book. And I am grateful to them. And by the way, I just need to say very quickly, because I didn't get a chance before, I'm grateful to the Free Press and to McNally Robinson for picking this book. I mean, I was gobsmacked, I have to say. I mean, Chris, you know this. You guys put on a terrific launch for me a year ago. And all of a sudden, in January or February, the press contacted me and said, your book has been selected by the Free Press Book Club. I said, whoa, I mean, thank you very much. Erin, thanks. I mean,
my pleasure.
Anyway, I don't have a question about one of the towns you come from, Leblon. What is the connection, if there is one, to there's cachaça named Leblon, right? And
yes, there is. Yes, there is. Leblon is I grew up in two neighborhoods in Rio. One is Copacabana and one is Leblon. And they are part of what's called the Zona Sul, or the south zone of the city, which is, this is deceptive, but it's the more affluent part of the city, which doesn't mean much. Copacabana these days is not a very pleasant place. But the name of the cachaça, Leblon, refers to the neighborhood. However, the best cachaça in Brazil comes from the middle of the country, from a state called Minas Gerais, where they make the best cachaça. However, there are bars that specialize in cachaça in Brazil, in Rio, and I will give you the name offline.
Excellent. I discovered caipirinha, which is
caipirinhas. Yes, I would be happy to make you one, Chris.
We should tell people what they are.
Yes, a caipirinha. So first of all, cachaça is the national drink of Brazil. It's made from cane liquor, and cane liquor is distilled from sugar cane. It's a fascinating process, but a caipirinha is cane liquor, a lime quartered an eighth and crushed and put in a glass, ice, sugar, and cane liquor, and then you let it sit. And so it ferments a little bit, and then you drink it. And people always make the mistake of having two because they're powerful. They taste so sweet that you think, oh, this is lovely and this is pleasant, and then
And they are refreshing on a warm day. I had one yesterday afternoon. I was so inspired by the book.
they are lovely drinks. I had two buddies up here fishing yesterday, and I offered to make them some caipirinhas, but we decided it was too hot, so we had a scotch.
So we've got about like 5 to 10 minutes left. So I'm going to throw back to Niigaan to kind of wind us down a little bit here.
I got a reader question here, and it's really the last one that I have, but it's about your writing process. I think a special shout out should be given, and you do in the book, to Andrus Taskins, everyone at Prairie Fire. I mean, of course, Andrus has left us now, and but Prairie Fire's still strong, and you know, so many of us were birthed by Prairie Fire. And just a big shout out to them, and a big support for all the things they've done for us as writers on the prairies here. What that tells me is that this book has taken a very long time to sort of think about, percolate, edit in your head, write in your head. What's your writing process? Is it that you've been working on this? I think you talk about the fact that you've been writing things for a very long period of time, but you've written sort of bits and pieces of this story over a long period. Tell us how that happened.
So first of all, I keep a journal. I've kept a journal for many, many, many years. The idea for this particular book arose first in 2014, but I had written unknowingly parts of it 50 years ago. So Fishing with Tardelli, the first section, it first appeared at McGill in 1971. It was a different story, but it was about fishing in Rio. So part of it is the journal. I take things from the journal. For example, The Affair with Words, It Never Ends, comes straight out of the journal. But Mavis Gallant said brilliantly that most of her work is cutting. Most of her work is cutting, and most of my work is cutting. So people say all the time, your reviews, your sentences are too long and they billow and so on. So I cut and I cut and I cut. In this book, I wanted to make it as coherent as I could, but at the same time, I wanted to move back and forth between past and present. In fact, you saw it in the section that I read to you today. I moved between Rio and Montreal and fishing there and coming to Montreal to be bar mitzvahs, two very, very, very different worlds. And I'm trying to make connections between them. So my whole process has to do with connecting disparate things, disparate places, histories, geographies, memories, and making them appear coherent. That's what it is.
For those of you that read the book, you'll also see that the pandemic makes an appearance, and you talk a little bit about, I actually started to read that little passage on vaccines, of course. Walter passed away in Rio in January 2022. He was 99. That's amazing, but he did die according due to the effects of COVID-19. Did you finish this during the pandemic?
I did. I finished it during the pandemic right here at Lake of the Woods. And we were going, the whole family was going, we had all bought tickets. We were going to Brazil to celebrate his 100th with him, which would have taken place on May 11th, 2022. And I was down there visiting with him and doing some research for another book when he died. He all of a sudden got COVID and died. unexpectedly because he was in pretty good shape, So, I mean, that's the way it goes. I mean, it's sad.
I think that regardless of some of the sadness, but all of the people in this book live on in different ways and are brought to the surface and brought to reality as a result of these words. Chris, I'll pan it back to you for the last wrap up here.
Well, I just want to say thanks, Neil. I was I mean, it is a memoir, but it's just so much more than a memoir. I was expecting to hear a story of your life, and I got so much thought-provoking. It reminded me of poetry in a way. Like there's so much in between the lines, and there's so much that you leave. Well, as you say, just that words can't capture it. Not just that we don't want to say it or something. It's just that they can only do so much. It was really striking, and it just struck me as so real. So thank you. I'm glad we picked it as well. It gave me the chance. I haven't been rereading books until I started this Free Press book club, and now I'm rereading books kind of regularly. It's an amazing experience to reread a book. I knew that. I used to know that. Borges used to say that kids know that and old people know that. But so I'm glad I'm learning it earlier than otherwise. But
that's a very good comment, Chris. You're reminding me, Northrop Frye used to say that we all learn poetry on our mother's knee. And he was talking about the rhythm and the meter of being bounced up and down. And there's nothing better than rereading. I agree with you. I love rereading. But of course, you have to balance it with all those things that you want to read. And what I find is the more I read, the more I realize what I haven't read. Example, I just finished Anna Karenina, which is a brilliant book. And now I want to read War and Peace, which I blush to say I have not read. Anyway,
me neither. I'm guilty.
Me neither. Well, that'll pretty much do it for us tonight. Thank you all so much for that amazing discussion. I think this was just like the perfect book to kick off summer season for sure. So briefly, I just wanted to mention that next month's book is The Woo Woo by Lindsay Wong. Also a memoir, but very different kind of memoir. So hope everybody enjoys that. We do not have a meeting in July. We're meeting in August. This is my last meeting, so I will not be at the August meeting, but my colleague Nadia Pankiw is going to be taking over my Free Press book club admin duties. She's unfortunately unable to attend tonight, but we're going to send out an email with some introductory information about her, and I'm very confident she will be perfectly capable to take over this club. But I'm still around for the next 4 weeks, so if you have any questions or you want to reach out, you can send an email to the book club email address. I also just wanted to mention that we launched our summer reading challenge for kids. I guess it was on Saturday. So if you have any kids or grandkids aged 7 to 15, we have curated reading lists for them to read over the summer. And we offer them the opportunity to review books, and we publish them in the paper. So it's kind of cool to get a byline. I'm just going to post the link in the chat. So if you want to register for that, it's free, and also partnered with McNally. So that's really fun. And the only change that might be coming is that our meetings will move from Monday nights to Tuesday nights to accommodate Nadia's schedule, but that won't start till September, and you will get a heads up about that as well. And I think that's it. That's everything. That's it for me. I'll see you in a year. But I'll try to pop on once the baby's born and show them to everybody. And I hope you enjoy your time with Nadia, and we'll see you again soon. Good night,
Thanks so
everybody.
much, everybody.
thank you
Thanks
very
for joining
much.
us.